Before we continue, I recommend you download the source code from the last project, as this has all the projects set out as it should be at the moment, with all the models, repositories, and in particular the repository base configured as it needs to be. So once you've downloaded that and loaded up the project, what we're going to do is set up migrations. Migrations is a facility that allows Entity Framework update and create the database accordingly without losing any data that's already in the database. But before we can start using it, we actually need to install and set up migrations. So what we will do first of all is we will go into the e-commerce web UI and go into the web.config file. In here you'll find a section that says connection strings. Now this defines the actual database settings of where the database will be, what the table name will be, and so on and so forth. What we need to do is copy that entire section and then go into our data access layer, and you should find an app.config file. Go into that file, and after the config sections, just paste that in. Now the reason why we do that is when we're doing migrations, it's going to be done against the actual project here, and so it needs to know where the database is going to be. Now by default it installs the database to localDB, which is a runtime instance of SQL Server that comes installed as part of Visual Studio. However, we want to make a few changes. We want to get rid of the attached DB file name because we don't really need that. And we also want to change the initial catalogue name because by default it's a very unfriendly name. So let's just get rid of that and call it e-commerce and save that off. Now while we're at it, we might as well do the same thing in the web.config. It's not required at this moment in time, but it will be when we actually start building the website itself. So again, let's just edit that so that it's a bit more user friendly. And save it all off. And now we're ready to go. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is enable migrations. So what we need to do is, in the Package Manager console window, which is a special kind of window for issuing commands to Visual Studio, if you don't see the window, go to your View menu, Other Windows, Package Manager console, and it will bring it up. So what we need to type is enable -migrations, and we need to make sure that the e-commerce.dal project is selected. If we press enter, now that's going to create an initial configuration file and a folder that will contain all our migrations, as we can see here. We don't need to worry too much about what's in there because out of the box the basic configuration will be fine. So once we've enabled migrations, we need to create our first migration to define the database as the model stands at the moment. So we simply type add-migrations and press enter. Add migrations, and then you need to give it the migration a name. So because this is the initial one, we'll call it initial. And it needs to be add migration, not migrations. Okay, there we go. So what it does is it creates this class. As you can see, there's a timestamp there with the actual name that we gave of initial, and this class basically creates our tables within our database. So in order to run that, what we need to do, back in Package Manager console and type update-database and press enter. Okay, now that's created the database. If you want to go and have a look within Visual Studio, go to our Server Explorer. First of all, let's just get because the data source is localDB, it's a bit of a funny name. So we'll go to Server Explorer, Data Connections, Add Connection. Just copy in our DB name. If we click the drop down box, we will see our e-commerce database. We can test the connection if we wish and click OK. So we shall now see our data connection there with all the tables, and as you can see, all the customer tables, order items, products and so on have all been defined for us. So we're pretty much ready to go now to start installing data and using that database. However, one thing that migrations is really powerful with, as I mentioned earlier, is the fact that we can change the model on the fly without losing any data that we've already put in the database. Well, what's that mean? Well, basically, say we decide after we've already put some data in the database that we want to extend the model. Let's say, for example, we want to add an extra field to product. So, I don't know, public decimal cost price, so that we can maybe work out our profits at the end of the day. We save that and close that down. So now the actual product itself has changed, however the table itself doesn't have that field in. Okay, so we go into our console, we say add -migration and then give it another name, so add cost price, enter, and then that creates us our new migration, which is going to add a column called cost price to the products table. So again, we just issue update -database, and now if we go back to the Server Explorer, we will need to do a refresh. Okay, and we will see products now has cost price. And that is migrations, a very powerful tool and sets us up nicely to start using our repositories.